Hi there, I'm Abe Jacob. I was born in '64. I lived in Serangoon Gardens all my life, most of it. Went on to RI, which is where I met Meng Fu, and then became artillery officer. I've traveled around the world and done many different things, and currently I'm involved in sustainable development, or ESG as people like to call it. So that's a short summary of who I am. Okay, I was born in Serangoon Gardens. I'm first generation born here in Singapore. My grandfather actually came from India and ended up in Malaya, as they called it, where he was a manager in an estate. And a few years later, he brought his eldest son. We think that was my dad. And subsequently, he brought his wife and everyone. So the rest of my dad's siblings were actually born in Malaya. Right? So that's why I said earlier that I'm the first generation born here in Singapore. So at the end of the war, my father came from Malaya to Singapore to study at RI, surprisingly, at RI, and he was staying with an uncle. So by the time he finished his education as well as his training as a teacher, his mother said, you know, I want you to buy a house, a big house, where the entire family can be under one roof and not separated as we were during the war and all of that. So he bought his house in Serangoon Gardens, probably one of the first houses built there, the first house in Farley Avenue, and that's where I grew up, and that's where my mom still lives actually. So it's still in the family. I think it was a very simple time then, right? So there was no aggregation of people of the same race or religion or anything, right? For three of my neighbors were all Chinese families, followed by a Malay family. Next to the coffee shop, there was this little mama shop that was run by Malay Muslims, Indian Muslims, right? And they had a small little place to sleep at the back in one of the houses. So what I remember clearly was that it was multiculturalism at its best, right from the beginning of my years. Chinese New Year, whole area would smell of Chinese food because people were transferring food to one house to another and sharing the load. And of course, when Hari Raya comes, it's a whole different ball game. And then Christmas, we'd make and distribute to families. So I think from that aspect, I was always aware keenly in my mind that even though we are different, there's always this kampong spirit that kind of keeps us all together, right? If people couldn't speak in English, then they fell back on Malay, right? So Malay was kind of the language that caught everybody. My dad spoke 7 languages, believe it or not. Also the kids, right, we were all around the same age, born in the early 60s to the mid 60s. So we'd be in each other's house all the time, right? Whether we were playing police and thief or roller skating on one roller skate because there wasn't enough to go around, or you know, building small little shotguns to fire at poor passers-by. I also spent a lot of time towards the time I was from age 10 to 12, I spent a lot of time in the Serangoon Gardens Recreation Club, which then went on to become the Serangoon Garden Country Club. So what was interesting there is during the school holidays, we'd all descend there at 4:30, right? So we'd jump through the monsoon drains and climb up and get there. And while the older men played proper football in the field, we'd all be in the basketball court, a small plastic ball or a real football, and you know, making our games and doing the best we could. It was interesting because I was a very piss poor footballer, but my leg was angled such that I could score goals. So people would just pass the ball to me and I'd score goals, right? Don't ask me to dribble, don't ask me to hit the ball. All this wasn't good at that time for me, right? So I think I must also say at this point that my parents were both teachers, and I think Dad brought stability to the family, right? There was always food on the table. He wasn't envious of people. He wasn't like needed to be at the top of his game or anything. He was a happy and content man, and I remember that I felt very comfortable because he provided stability for the family. I think also that my mom was a bit more ambitious, but I think her greatest contribution to my life is teaching me my mother tongue first before English, because as she rightfully pointed out, if I teach him English first, he will never come back to the mother tongue. right? So I can read, write and speak in Malayalam, Tamil, of course, was English. My dad was also very particular that we spoke Queen's English. So at odd times of the day, he would get me and say, write a composition. Right? Here's the Wren and Martin book. Older people will know this, right? The grammar had to be good, punctuation had to be good. He would make me practice presse writing, which is all but non-existent now. It had to be precise, not right? Presse, precise. You had to condense it to 1/3 of what you were reading. And so by the time I went to RI, I was actually very good at all of this, right? And I felt that I was properly equipped for a secondary education. I'll tell you a funny story though. I didn't know my dad came from RI, and I've never even heard the school. But in 1974-75, they had the Science and Industry quiz, and every year I'd support Anderson Secondary School. Right? Why? I don't know. They just showed a lot of energy, and every time they won a point, they'd be celebrating and all that. So I just fell in love with Anderson Secondary School. So when it came time for me to select a school, my parents kind of mentioned Raffles Institution, and I was a little pissed because they had beaten Anderson when I was in primary 6, right? I was a little pissed, right? I don't want to go to RI, I want to go to Anderson Secondary School. And Dad was like, why? I went to RI and you should go too. And I was like, what? You went to RI? As all father-son issues, this is how it evolves, right? And Mom was saying, nothing doing, we're going to apply for RI and see where this goes. So I was like, okay, half-heartedly I said, alright, and by God's will, I made it to RI. So that's my story of Serangoon Gardens. So my Rafflesian days, I think the first thing I remember is, my dad gave me a wallet, a bus pass, my IC, cut a hole in the little wallet and put a home key in there and said, adios, do not call us anymore, do not disturb me, I won't be picking you up anywhere. Just take the 104 bus from our Serangoon Garden terminal and I'll see you when you come home. Right? So on day 1, I did it, went there, and I think we were in afternoon session, and there was this assembly of all the new Sec 1 RI boys. I think Philip Liao came striding in his final year as principal, and I still remember to this day, right? And as I'm going to say this, I probably have goosebumps again, right? His first line to us, right? From this day onwards, boys, you are always going to be a Rafflesian. Remember that. From this day onwards, all of you, you're going to be known as Rafflesians, right? So hairs stood up, didn't know exactly quite what that meant, but we were in this big hall where they had on one side all the principals that RI had ever had. On this side, there's all these names of Queen scholars and President scholars and head prefects and all that. And I think it left a very deep sense of history with me, right? Why is this important? And I can also remember going back that day and asking my father, just in case he's lying to me, right? I said, you went to RI, right? He says, yes. He says, what is the name of your principal during your time? And he said, Hallett. And I said, okay, no running away from this then. He knew what he was talking about. So that was my first couple of days in RI. I think back then, it was a group of people who had done well in their primary 6 PSLE. I don't think there's anything around this, what people call elitist or elitism now. Lots of jokes about RI. But I thought it was a wonderful environment. I think the teaching environment was wonderful. We had wonderful teachers. I hope through this interview I can say thank you to them, wherever they are and wherever they are. There were mostly nurturing teachers, but some teachers you remember because they frightened the hell out of you, right? So I'm giving Miss Doreen Tambaya a fine fame here, and the late Mr. Jaswan Lal, right? They kind of instilled a bit of fear in you, but when you look back at it, it was all good fun, kind of probably worked for us in some way or another, instilling discipline and so on. Yeah. So RI was I was a pretty average student, really. I think I wanted to do sports like my father and his brothers, but because they had difficulty in pursuing sport and education, my parents rather I studied at home and became a doctor, which of course I didn't. So, yeah, and I'm happy I didn't. So that was my time in RI. It's really nothing much else to say. I joined the hockey team in Pre-1 because my uncles played hockey, and I thought, if I told my parents that I had to take up a sports CCA, they might actually allow me to go and do this. So I did it for a year, and I wasn't good at it, right? If I had to go back and say what would you have trained at, it would be track and field. Yeah, I was in Tamil LDCS, we won some trophy for debating. I took part in many interclass games, so I took part in hockey, I took part in softball. I actually love softball, I must say, right? The sound as the ball leaves your bat and seeing how far it goes. I think I enjoyed softball very much. Yeah, so I took part in interclass debates and all of that. Yeah, so I was active but not representing school at school level, just minor stuff. You have to be in a class on time. She kind of talked at you and down at you. Again, don't get me wrong, it's real funny stories now, but back then, if we were in the canteen and the clock tower showed the wrong time and you realized that you're going to miss a class or be late by a minute, you'd get there within that minute. You'd get there somehow, scaling the walls, running up, whatever. Being in a all-boys primary school and all-boys secondary school. So the first time we had female students in the class. Talk about being nervous, right? I was so nervous that I probably didn't even know how to speak to my fellow classmates who were girls. Right? And all this had to be rectified later in life. So if I had a kid, I'd probably put them in a co-ed school by secondary school. I think that was overcome probably when I was working, not even in university. I was a little, probably a boy's boy, man's man, right? Full of shit, as all university undergrads can be at that age. But I probably overcame that when I was working and had to work with women colleagues as well as colleagues who are women from around the world. So you have to learn how to speak to American, British, Eastern European, and African, Filipino, whatever, right? So it's only through those interactions that I became a little more confident about myself, my ability to deal with everyone. As I said, I was a pretty average student in RI, and I didn't have much accolades to show in terms of sports and all that. So I think by the time I finished my A-levels, I was pretty driven to do something, right? To do something of achievement, to do something of significance. I just didn't know what that was, but I applied myself, right? I went into the army and I applied myself, do my best, right? And my mother is a huge proponent of the military, right? Most mothers were weeping at the manpower base, right? To see their sons go off to national service. My mother couldn't wait to get me to go to national service, right? She was just didn't even come to the manpower base, right? Get out of the house, see you when you're back, right? No issues with that. But I think the pride of serving my nation comes from my mom, right? She's the one who inspired me to do my best, and do whatever. Not that she said, one day I want you to be an officer. No, she did not put any pressure. She's just proud that I'm serving. So what happened was, after BMT, it's the first award I actually received, right? It's the second best recruit in the platoon. I was like, I still have it here somewhere, right? So from there I went on to OCS, and so this is another thing, right? So all my friends from RI went to a certain platoon. I was separate and sent somewhere else. So I was always like, why are all my friends there and I'm here by myself? So I have to make friends all over again. Same thing happened after I made friends. The people in my BMT, a lot of them went to infantry. I went to support. So same thing, make new friends all over again from scratch. And I also remember that we had a dynamic platoon commander who was from armor. So when it came time for senior term, we all applied for armor. When I grow up, I want to be like the last Snyder, right? But that batch, no armor intake, so we all went to artillery. And we were like, but I must say, Mengfu, one of the best things that happened to me was going to the Singapore Artillery, right? You talk about leadership, camaraderie, knowledgeable men and now women, people who've got your back, right? The exposure and experience you get in the artillery, the mindset that you have to adopt, the overall big picture, and then addressing the small things. So I'm not saying that going to some other place is not as good, but if you're an infantry, you're likely to attack an objective and that's it. You do whatever it takes to get there. But in the artillery, you have to think about what the engineers are doing, what kind of signals, if the signal goes down, what happens, what the maneuver plan is at all times, because your existence is dependent on what the maneuver force. So all that planning, minute planning, all the deployments in the ground, it just made me a completely different animal 2.5 years after my A-levels. By the time I went to university, I felt like I was an adult, grown-up man, right? And of course, I couldn't say this, right? But when I look back, yeah, I entered university different from most of my friends, right? I had virtually led a battalion. At that young age, we had operationalized ourselves in Taiwan, and I couldn't go around telling people, hey, I have done this. No, nobody was interested, right? But deep down, I felt that the Singapore Artillery did more for me than anything up to that point in life. This guy who was the Division Artillery Commander then, Andrew Tan, he was a major, then he's retired general now, but he's the first one to tell me, if you are starting on a plan, you need to know why you're doing that plan, and you need to know what 2 levels above you are doing. If you don't, if you know only 1 level above you, you are just fulfilling the KPI of that 1 level above you. But if it's 2 levels above you, you know that you're part of a bigger plan. So whatever project you start, which has served me till this day, right? If I am in Rotary or I'm in the workplace or whatever, I'm given a project, it's instinctive now. I don't have to think about it, right? I'll always ask the question, what's 1 level doing above and what's the level above? Okay, once I know this, I'm able to mobilize and do what I need to do, right? So planning comes very easy for me in all aspects of my life, like planning for my wedding, right? It was very easy, right? Planning with my wife was very easy because we were both on the same page, but I had the big picture. And I can say, do this is how we do, move on, right? So I think that's why I said Singapore Artillery is a big part of my life. And NUS Science faculty, so I would say that another thing that dawned on me is that we had lectures from 8 in the morning to 12, an hour break for lunch, and then lab work from 1 to 5 p.m. 5 days a week. You talk to your friends from arts, architecture, law, business, right? I don't know, 4 hours lecture a week, maybe 3 hours tutorial, and then one time on target. And I mean, the irony is that it taught us discipline and all of that, right? I mean, I can walk past in the East Coast and identify multiple plants there or birds that fly around, all that, but those don't bring you money, right? It's good, right? I use a lot of that to teach my granddaughter now, right? She finds it fascinating. But I think those long hours also didn't allow us to socialize much. We're just running from lab to lab, and finally after year 4 you finish your exam and you're literally just worn out. You put your head down and ask yourself, so what exactly did this education give me, right? Other than the paper. Everybody will say, oh, you just need those 3 alphabets or whatever number of alphabets behind your name. True. But did I enjoy myself? Yes. I was very active in sports. I was very active in the club, science club, as editor of the newspaper or newsletter or something. Made a lot of friends whom I'm still in touch with. There's plenty of WhatsApp groups to remind you of all the nonsense you did in earlier university. And we get together for lunches or dinners sometimes, so yeah, it's a good time. So because Serangoon Gardens was really very far from anywhere, so it took me about an hour and a half minimally to get to university. A few of us rented a place at Normanton Park, which is literally a bus ride away or a cycle. I used to cycle to US. And so there were 4 of us staying in Normanton Park, and so it was ours to use, right? So every once in a while in science faculty we'd come up with this thing, hey, we haven't had a meet night for a long time. So what's a meet night? It's the day when we all drink beer and the only food is meat. No vegetables, no carbs, no nothing. So we'd organize and we'd go there and have a good time, sing songs. And the reason why I even learned to play a guitar later in life is because when we were singing these songs, none of us could play an instrument, right? And so we'd use spoons, bowls, picture frames to give the beat and all of that. It's fun times. It was really fun. No women were allowed until much later, so all the guys could talk as much rubbish as we wanted and just had a good time, right? And we did this every few months. Neat man. Right? We would ask people to bring their own beer mugs and we'll say we're having a competition, but we'd always sabotage one or two people, right? For whatever reason, and yeah. After graduation, there's only one thing on my mind, which is not to be in science anymore. Right? I had enough of test tubes and dissections and all that good stuff. So I applied to jobs, anything but science. And I landed up at SPH in the marketing division because I wanted to be a journalist, but Lim Kim San came on board and he said, he started to retrench journalists, so that opportunity went away. So I applied for the marketing job and I got it. So interestingly, when I went for the interview, there were 4 interviewers there and they asked me, right, do you know why you've been called for an interview? And I said, no. And they said, well, we have never had a science grad who doesn't know anything about selling come apply for this job, so we just wanted to see who you were. And I said, well, there's a lot more to me than just being a science grad. And it kind of dragged on for a while until one of them finally said, so it says that you're a military officer. Can you tell us a little bit about this part of your life? And bang, that's when Abe Jacob popped up and said, well, I am from the Singapore Artillery and I was operations officer of 23 SA and this is what I've done. And so then they were like, wow, okay. And they pushed me on to the second interview. So my second interview was with a gentleman called Anthony Ng, love him to bits. And first question, even before I got my seat on the chair, he says, shouldn't you be looking after some trees in a park? And I said, no, not necessarily, but if you had some patience, you'd actually see what I'm capable of. So he kept pushing me and finally he says, I need one more reason after the 50 reasons I'd given him why to hire me. He said, one more reason. And I said, you give me the job and I'll give you the last reason. And he said, you've got the job. So that's how I ended up in Singapore Press Holdings for 3 years. When I joined SPH, it was actually the Straits Times 1975 Limited. And so I started off my life in marketing and sales for the Straits Times and Sunday Times. But after a year or two, they decided to merge all the 9 newspapers together, and so we operated under the SPH umbrella. Interestingly, SPH was a good job for me because just like the artillery, I had to learn about several industries all at one go, right? So I had to know about the auto industry, I had to know about manufacturing, I had to know about retail, whoever I met who needed a space in the Straits Times. So that gave me a really big picture industry-wide, right? Secondly, Straits Times itself, to put a newspaper out there to consumers every day, right? You have to talk to journalists, you have to talk to the printing people, you have to talk to the circulations people, you have to talk to promotions people. So you really have to be talking to a whole bunch of people before you get things out. When things go wrong, for example, the color runs and things like this, you have to know what went wrong at the printing side of things, how many copies were affected, what does that mean before you compensate the client and all that. So I think it was a very steep learning curve for me, but in retrospect, I was in the right environment, right? Something I like doing, lots of things to learn, lots of people to work with, not just my own team and things like that. So I think I thrived in that environment for a while, but then after 3 years, I decided to move on because I felt that the general manager and the group division marketing guy and I were doing the same thing, right? You go to this person and say, yeah, I need some space for this client. So I said, I don't want to spend the next 20 years doing this same thing over and over again. My second job was in a place called the Service Quality Center, and it was a 50-50 joint venture between Singapore Airlines and the National Productivity Board. They had come together because it was a national mission to raise the level of service in Singapore at that time. And it wasn't just about being nice or saying good morning, hello, how, no, none of that, right? That was part of it, but how you presented yourself, talk about perception, you talk about technology for changing the levels of service in companies. So if you go to some of the banks and you look at IRAS and all that, right? The way they form the queue system, televisions are strategically put in places so that you don't feel like you've been queuing for the last half hour and things like that. All of that was put together by us, right? And I will always be grateful to Service Quality Center because it made me an outstanding trainer. How? Because we had to train a lot, right? There's enough rest, of course, for sure, but we had to train a lot. And if you remember the story about the Beatles, they were nobody until they went to Germany. And in Germany, they played from 5 in the evening until maybe 7 the next morning with little break, right? And that's how they became good. And they came back from their stint in Germany, and people watching them at the cavern, they were like, who are these guys? Are they from here? What happened? Same thing, right? I was still selling, I was still doing sales, but I was also having to train. And we trained so much that I must say, I can touch my heart and say I'm a good trainer. Right? I'm a really good trainer. And the difference is a lot of C-suite executive think that, it's just a trainer, what's the big deal? Buddy, I'd like to see you train. Just because you do a 20-minute presentation well, doesn't mean you can train for 2 days straight. That's all I'll say, right? So it gave me that confidence to stand up in front of people, complete strangers, every week, day in, day out, and be able to train. I think the group was young, right? The team of trainers were young, and I'm still in touch with many of them today because the camaraderie was very strong in that group. There were a lot of good leaders there as well, right? I mean, I had people like Sim KV and Ron Kaufman and all these people that I worked with. Sim KV was an interesting guy. He's retired now. Once upon a time, slotted to be a potential to be MD of Singapore Airlines, but he's the first guy who introduced to us in a small company the idea of world class. Can we be a world class organization? All of us laughed, right? It's such a local company in Singapore. Why would anyone think of us as world class? But we eventually became a world class organization in terms of our quality of trainers, the training we provided, and all that. And since then, I've always used this line when I'm asked to take over a poor performing team, a team that is low on morale and results and all of that. I'll go in there, and after assessing the situation, I'll ask them, do you think it's possible for us to become a world-class team? And I'll get the same response, are you sure? Come on, nothing's been happening for a while. But I think it's important that we set a vision that is bold and brave if you want to get anything done. Right? I felt that in my life, I wasn't just there to solve problems. Yes, we need to solve problems, but there's just so much more you can do with human potential. At that time, the internet came about, and I felt that being a big fish in a small pond had reached kind of its limits, and I wanted to explore the world, right? Because when I went out with my friends from GE or IBM, right, they were talking about supply chain and all sorts of things and how the internet helps them, and I was still talking about paper and pen training, flip charts and all of that. So I decided to look for a job that was either in banking, IT or telecom, and I got picked up by Northern Telecom or Nortel Networks as it became known then. So they couldn't give me a sales job because I was not an engineer, but they liked enough of me to say, come and be an internal consultant. I said, what does that mean? He says, take your laptop, go to people who need your help, provide training, get some things done. So I said, okay. So I went there. A year later, I was offered a human resource manager job. I was like, what would I know about HR? Please, I don't like it, right? So I said no, and continued to do my internal consulting job. Expats have a way of disappearing during Christmas, and this lowly person was put in charge of the organization in December 97. The Silk Air crash happened, and when I came back one day, I checked my voicemail, and one of the HR ladies left a message for me saying, I think one of our employees may not be from Singapore, but I saw one of our badges amidst the picture of the wreckage on the news. And here I am thinking, wow, who's going to solve this, right? So the next day I went into the office, and the top guy, president of Asia South Pacific, was already calling, who's in charge? So they passed the phone to me and he asked me, who's in charge? I said, I am. Who are you? I said, yes sir, before we talk about what we want to talk about, this is what happens every year when your expats go back on home leave en masse. I said, you're at home too, right? He says, yes. So one thing led to another. Because of my military training, I was able to manage the situation about who the affected employee was, how to connect with his wife, when is the wife coming in, what are we going to do with the body, and all of that. So managed to do everything right. This is just before Christmas, right? So we all went on Christmas leave, came back, he comes back from his vacation, and he calls my boss. So French Canadian calls the British guy and says, you have an empty slot in the human resource department that has been vacant for 2 years, right? He says, yes. Why haven't you offered it to Abe? So the English guy says, it's his birthday today, by the way. English guy says today, I did. I offered him the job. He didn't want it. So the president of Asia South Pacific says, you're an idiot. Just make him a HR director, give him enough salary that he won't say no. And that was my introduction to HR. And surprisingly, the first job I had to do in HR was restructuring. Wouldn't know a thing. Asked HQ, an hotel in Canada, for any SOPs about. They said no, we don't have any, and even if we did, it's probably all gone. So I had to write from scratch a restructuring manual. What is the policy? What do we do? How do we make sure that we let go of employees with their dignity intact? And that year, 1998, we had to let go over 600 people all across Asia Pacific. I don't think I want to do that kind of exercise again. It is really heart-wrenching. But I think we did a good job in terms of paying a proper severance package, treating people with dignity, helping them find jobs in the future, and things like that. So that was my introduction to HR. So we did the second retrenchment on my birthday. And when my birthday comes around, I still always spare a thought for what happened on that day. The HR function was also not where I wanted to finish my life and career. So when an opportunity came, I went back to the business to do commercial marketing and bid management. And through several rounds of other business reasons, I ended up absorbing a lot of departments under me, right? Customer service. And what this did for me is that I got to understand how an organization works, whether it's a merger and acquisition, whether it's restructuring, right? It's two ends of the train, and they gave me a really good idea as to how businesses are run. I hadn't done anything in finance, still haven't, just it's okay with me. And then I had this opportunity to go overseas. So what turned out to be, what was supposed to be a 6-month stint in Australia turned out to be 3 years. Again, a lot of problems because the dot-com crash had come upon us, and there's a lot of movement of people, and my job wasn't made easy because the whole capital market just disappeared, right? So you're putting out bids and you're putting all of this stuff, but not much results. But anyway, at this time, I decided that maybe I should take a break after 11 or 13 years of work and go study, do something. So I put in my applications, did my GMAT, worst exam you can ever take in your life, and I got accepted at Thunderbird. I got accepted at University of California as well, and also at INSEAD, but INSEAD wanted me to do my MBA here because they had just started their new campus here, and I said no, I want to be in an environment which is a different environment, international curriculum, international faculty, international colleagues. So that's why I went to the desert to do my MBA at the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Glendale, Arizona. And talk about having to adapt, right? So I was in the desert environment. It was when I reached there, it was probably 112, 113 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was anything unlike Singapore or Australia where I'd been. When I hit Australia, I hit the ground running, but in Arizona, it was really hot and everything revolved around the weather and how you adapt to it. But I think in terms of classes and things like that, it was refreshing to take that change. I was an older student, they call me old man, not an issue. I would say that to be in a cultural mix of international faculty, international students, international curriculum, it is just mind-boggling. It was some of the best experiences of my life. But things were not run very well for the students back then. They had this thing called the student government. I had no idea what it was. So I made a few complaints, and these American guys who come to me and says, "You should join the student government." And I said, "Why?" "So be part of the change. Don't make too many complaints." I'm like, "Okay, I'll give this a go." So I joined the student government. 2 trimesters later, I became the student government president. It was a good experience. One of the things I used to do was, instead of just having a meeting weekly for the student government, I invited all the departments of the school. I said, send a representative so that you know what the students are doing and things like that. I also think that a lot of students complain. They say, "Oh, we are paying you money, we are the customer, the school should be doing this and that and all that." And I think one of the things I used to tell them is, we are attending grad school to prepare ourselves to enter the workforce. That's it. Whether you paid money or your father paid, but whatever, it doesn't matter, right? Come here and learn, be humble and learn so that you are prepared to enter the workforce. So we had fun doing that. And in showing a little bit of leadership around the college, I received the top student award, right? Not for my grades, but for the leadership I showed, right? It was called the Barton Carl Young Award, and I wear that name with pride, right? So it's not very often that a Singaporean goes on his own volition and buck and turns up as the top student of the university, of an American university. So I'm very proud of that. I stayed in the US for 5 years altogether. After my MBA, I worked there for a while. And I worked for an organization called TGen Foundation. It was a group of people who had come to Arizona and set up shop to bring personalized medicine to people in the future. That's where my science degree actually came in, right? They were surprised at how quickly I picked up the presentation because I understood it. I understood what they were doing. And I was able to talk to a lot of donors and all that to bring some money. Time and space decided that I should come back to Singapore, and I'm glad I did, because my dad was going to turn 80, and one of the things that I managed to organize was his 80th birthday party, in which his brothers and sister from all over the world came to surprise him, and they had not been on common soil for almost 46 years. So that one act I still consider a big tick in my life, right? My father was very, very, very pleased and happy to see his siblings all sitting in the same living room in 3 Farley Avenue in Serangoon Gardens. So that was something good that I did. At this time, a couple of other things happened. Just before I left Arizona, I was introduced to a book called Capitalism at the Crossroads. And I'd kind of sworn off management books at this point because it's the same thing, different, written in different. But this book made an impression, right? It talked about sustainable development, but it came from an academic. Right? Back in the day, if an academic said it, it took a long time to get into mainstream. But we were in that progressive state where information was coming into mainstream pretty quickly, and I started reading other books, right? So Capitalism at the Crossroads, The End of Poverty by Jeffrey Sachs, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. These were my 3 bedrock for my entry into sustainable development. All because I happened to see this book and I read it. So when I came back to Singapore, I started talking to people about sustainable development, and they were like, "What are you all about, right? No one's talking about this." So my wife, who had heard me talking non-stop about this, said, you need to do a master's degree in environmental management. And my response was, "Why? I already have an MBA. Why would I do a second?" And she says, "No, you have to do this." And I said, "If you are so smart, why don't you do it? Then we'll both have an MBA, master's program each." And she says, "No, you go and do." So I did. I did a Master of Science in Environmental Management at NUS. And they had already been on to this program for a while because they adopted this curriculum from the Yale School of Forestry, which is not often mentioned, but so that was it. So I got a second master's in this, and at that time I also joined Ecolab in HR first because they needed someone there, and then a couple of years later I was told to take on the general manager's role in Singapore, which I did amidst two very painful mergers and acquisitions. So I was doing the HR job, I was doing a master's, I was doing this mergers and acquisitions, and the army comes knocking, right? The army comes back knocking. And I made just one request, right? I've been in the liaison line for 13 years, my reservist, my national service tenure, and I said, I'm really a man of the field. I like working with people. Can I get a job in the battalion? That's what I asked. I did not say, I want to be this, I want to be that. None of that. I said, I want to be with the battalion. And this has never happened in Singapore before, right? It's never happened in Singapore because I had missed the phase of going through a battery commander and all of that. I've been too long in the liaison line. But as God would have it, He said, no son, I think you are going to be a commanding officer. So by the grace of God, I was given command of the 286th Battalion Singapore Artillery, the first platform on the Primus, right? And if I look back, I think I've done a lot of things in my life, but the pride I feel is in actually leading this group of people, because I could see early on that the officers were gung-ho but severely inexperienced and not knowing what a battalion does, or not caring, right? As long as I do what I have to do in my silos. So we had to tear down the mindset. It took me 2 years to tear down this mindset, build it up again at the command level, right? Meaning I had to get my officers and war specs right before we start doing good things down the line. Once they started to understand what needed to be done, we were an unstoppable force. And we did really well in operationalizing the battalion in New Zealand in 2015. And not only that, I think without my knowing, I always ask my officers, see, we are a good team now. One day, would you like to continue beyond the 10 years of NS? And they always tell me, oh sir, no, please, we just want to do and get on with our lives, our marriages, our kids, our jobs and all that. And after 2015, this battalion has produced 5 Lieutenant Colonels, 5 COs, a DVT officer, 3 RSMs. I can't remember, so all in all about 12 people who have rolled over. I don't think that has ever happened in Singapore, right? This is also not known throughout MINDEF, right? To them it's like, oh okay, right? So I'm very proud of this command team, really proud of their achievements after 286, and also I give praise and thanks to God because He's left me a legacy, right? He's left me a legacy, and I never thought. Sometime around the time of my 55th birthday, I was invited to join the Rotary Club of Sentosa. And I'd heard about Rotary. I have family members in Rotary, but no one had really invited me. So I always thought that Rotary, you should do it when you're young. And I also felt that Rotary was a old man's club, like a cult. And by the time they invited me, I thought that this would be a wonderful place to retire, smoke a cigar and drink whiskey. Unfortunately, it couldn't be further from the truth because in the last 5 years, I've already been engaged on programs in Siem Reap. My club is very active and vibrant. We do a lot of local, so we go out there, and what we do annually now is we distribute 1,000 bicycles to school children so that they don't have to walk to school. And we've been doing this for 10 years. We distribute minimally 1,000 bicycles a year in Siem Reap, and we go there and oversee this. We've built toilets in about 49 schools so far in the last 4 years, the onset of COVID. And this year we've launched a digital education program, right, by refurbishing old laptops and giving them out to schools where we see motivated principals and and those with a deep desire to get into the digital age. I think it's very keen because recently we met up with Lenovo. We were just going there to say, hey, you have more computers that we can refurbish and give away. And they introduced us to an ecosystem of how we can actually do something really meaningful really quickly in schools in Siem Reap, and also scale this to the rest of Cambodia. So we're working on it, but it's really exciting times, right? So a lot of mindsets to be torn and broken down, but I think we're on the right path. So Rotary has served me really well. They gave me the presidency for a year as is the Rotary system, and we've done a lot of things for people in Rotary. So that kind of puts me in an area that I want to be going forward, which is to actually make a difference, a meaningful difference in people's lives, especially the poorest of the poor. Yeah. So in the meantime, I started my own consultancy, and the bulk of my time is now spent on business transformation as well as ESG consulting itself. So I have most of my work is done with a company called RHT Green for ESG, and I still run my Future Proof Global for business transformations. I had mentioned sustainable development earlier, an area that I'm very passionate about. I think sometime in 2020, the finance universe globally decided that we have to come up with the term, and they came up with this term called ESG, environment, social and governance, by which you show that you are a company with business continuity plans, to show that you have proper governance within your company, to show that you are looking after the environment, so your people are not engaged in slavery, paying a proper wage. All of this comes under ESG. But I think that is still a risk management tool for people who want to borrow money or people who want to invest. Nothing wrong with that. I just think that given the climate changes that are going on and the climate risks that the globe faces, I would still put it under sustainable development umbrella, under which we have to do this ESG risk mitigation work. So, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention Liverpool Football Club. In 1974, when all the Sunday school boys were playing football after church, I was introduced to this boy who says, "So who do you support?" He said, "Better be Manchester United or Leeds," because those were the two in clubs at that time. And I said, "I'll think about it." I went back and told my dad, who was a footballer himself, I said, "I need help." So he told me, this is how football works, these are the tables, we publish this every Monday, and this is... And he said to me, in 2 weeks' time, Liverpool is playing in the FA Cup final, you might want to watch that. So I said, okay, then I asked him, who do you support? He said, I don't support anyone. Okay. So I watched the 1974 FA Cup final between Liverpool and Newcastle. Liverpool won 3-0, and it was instant love affair. I've never wavered from Liverpool Football Club for the last, 50 years. 50 years. And there was a time when we were winning everything easily, and then of course Manchester United took over under Sir Alex Ferguson, and they had their time in the sun. But what I'd like to say is that in Liverpool, that there is a certain Liverpool way of doing things, right? It's not around money and big players and things like that. It's a very traditional club, and we do things the right way. I must say that in 2015 I was quite sure that Liverpool would just be a mid-table club for the rest of its life. But then in comes Jurgen Klopp, and if you want to talk about a manager who does things right and is able to get the best out of people, not just at Liverpool, but in his time in Mainz as well as Dortmund, you're looking at this one person. And I've drawn inspiration so many times from him about how to overcome adversity, bad news and all that, because in my mind, if he can do it at a club like Liverpool, well, so can I in the smaller areas of my life. So I would like to say that in my life I'm very blessed because I went to RI. I'm from the Singapore Artillery. I've got my global presence because of Thunderbird, and I support Liverpool Football Club, which is another global institution. So I'm really very blessed to be associated with this sport. I'm actually really buzzing around turning 60, right? Because if you, a human's life, if you break it up into 4 quarters, I should have been in my third quarter for the last 10 years. But I don't think mentally I was prepared to accept that. But I must say that I'm ready to enter my third quarter at 60. So what does that mean for me? I want to live a God-centric life. Now, what do I mean by that? In my life, I never planned most of the things that have happened to me, right? And I believe that as long as God has a use for me, my aim is to fulfill His will. That's number one. Number two, I want to be mentally, physically, and spiritually fit. I want to be able to continue my work in Rotary because I think it is very meaningful for me to be involved in projects that help the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the disadvantaged, and so on. I think I want to be a role model and a leader in my community, in my office, my workplace, as well as my family. I want to be an outstanding grandfather to Rebecca, and of course not by myself, but with the help of our village, my wife, my other grandparents, uncles, aunties, and so on. Right? That we want to give the best for Rebecca, and I want to be a lifelong part of that. And I think we must take it easy at some time, right? So I'd really like to travel the world and enjoy experiences with my wife Sandra, and also be a role model of what a good marriage can be. I think there are a lot of people who remain in very unhappy situations, and I'm lucky to have gotten out of that and into a good situation, a great situation. So I thank the Lord for that as well, and of course that's our aim, right? Enjoy, and whatever time God has given us, to be the best that we can.
Okay, good.